a theory of prices without an underlying binding principle. And it really, it ties back to the first question from this anti-Marx book, I guess, or whatever paper. I start comparing prices with prices directly, and I just say, okay, one price is a derivative of the other price. I lose any underlying binding principle, which is completely fair, but what I have to be aware of now is that every partial question that I try to analyze is completely isolated from any other question. I don't have a common base of an economic organization of a society anymore. Even if I think, okay, so that's how capitalism works, and that's how factor productivities work, and that's how demand and supply works, none of that is reflected in my singular analysis, which is also a reason why much of neoclassical economics nowadays produces completely contradictory results in one issue and the other. So I come from labor economics, as I think Ricardo said in the introduction. We have a huge problem here that the same people will argue that minimum wages do increase unemployment and do not increase unemployment in different studies because they look at the same price base. It's not tied together. Now, if we extend it to the working together of labor economics, economics of production and innovation, and then the productions of international trade, we start having these completely contradictory approaches. For example, with trade theory, where within one country we talk about the efficient allocation of labor from one industry to the other, and the equalization of prices between those. Whereas for international trade, we talk about initial endowments that do not change because we assume away mobility of labor and capital. And this can stand right next to each other because there's no binding theory. And in my opinion, neoclassical economics or post-Ricardian economics have not found a substitute for value theory to use here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Renzo Abruzzese, en español, nos dice, ¿cómo funciona la teoría del valor-trabajo en una fábrica totalmente robotizada? In English, how does the labor theory of value work in a fully automated factory? Or in an economy factory?
Yes, that's an extremely important question. Thank you for posing it. I always get these questions also from my students. There is some research into that, so I'm first going to speak purely to the empirical side, and that is, of course, robots or a fully automated factory still is the product of labor that is then given off to other commodities, and it still has operators, people that repair the machines, people that organize production, people that write the software and tweak the software, but it's much fewer people, so that there's now a few car plants and how do you call them, semiconductor plants here in Austria that are almost fully automated, where like previously there would be 400, 500 workers working there, now there's 100. It's also a tragedy really to the trade union movement. So we still have labor happening there, very productive labor and very high skilled labor, by the way, and also labor that's way better paid. But we can also see in these industries that prices go down once they're fully automated. So for a single factory in a larger industry, or for an industry that becomes more and more automated, we will see a decrease of prices within the general system, which is much like even David Ricardo already said would happen. Fully automated society would be a society of machines that repair and organize themselves. This is a society where productive relations don't exist anymore between workers and capitalists. I'm not entirely sure if that society can exist logically, but if it would not be a capitalist society anymore, and therefore the labor theory of value would not apply anymore.
Okay, thanks. Natalia Ríos nos mandó una pregunta, dice en español, ¿qué implicaciones fiscales derivan de sus hallazgos? ¿Apoyaría, por ejemplo, impuestos diferenciados a la renta extractiva por su impacto distorsivo en precios y valores? In English, what fiscal implications follow from your findings? Will you support differential taxes on extractive rent due to its distortive impact on prices and values?
Okay. Thank you so much. This is a really good question. This is something that we have recently started thinking about more. Me personally, I'm not an expert in fiscal policy. I know some things about regulatory policy, but just from the top of my head, the problem with extractive rents is that it creates this extra profit motive for capitalists to overcapitalize the exploitation of what we call non-human nature, which brings then really bad second round effects for people who live around that. I think in Chile, there's now this example of these lithium mines where the dust has become poisonous, and also groundwater cannot be used anymore by people living around it. I would make two arguments here. One is that there exist huge tax loopholes for ecological destruction, especially for companies from the imperialist center who invest in the neo-colonial periphery. So here, international value transfers and ground rents are really tied together. And there's a lot of good research, by the way, coming out of Argentina nowadays that tie that together, but that's a side note. What I want to say here is these tax loopholes obviously are a huge problem because that's also fiscal income that is taken away from neo-colonial countries and given to huge corporations in the imperialist center. So yes, any kind of improvement in tax system that works against that would be agreeable from a fiscal and from a fiscal justice point of view. But I think we need to go a step further. We need to think about the broader implications for people's lives, both of the climate crisis as a large part and of the ecological destruction of concrete spaces. And here I think we need regulation on how much ecological resources can be exploited, by which means. And I really think that one important aspect of that, and I know that you have been discussing that, Bolivia, with the presidency, is to keep that in public hands, not in privatized hands. So there is some aspects of production that are so important for the livelihood of people that even under capitalism, it would be very bad to allow the individual profit motive to decide if the livelihood of the villages around the lithium mine are worth the cut in profits. At the end of the day, I really believe that we need to cut down on our use of natural resources, that we need a planned de-investment from our resource and energy heavy investment, starting with the imperialist center, really, where there's 150 years of ecological exploitation that led to the accumulation. And here the works of Kohei and others are really important about how you could have a planned de-investment and de-installment of the economy. But for now, I think this is the direction in which we should be going. And our research here, it does have something to do with that, like also the empirical research, because it shows that the motive to overexploit the ecology is not a mistake in the tax code. It's not what they call it, an uninternalized externality. It is a basic functioning of capitalism since the early days of enclosure in 18th century Britain and England that have led to this overexploitation and to these negative effects on people's livelihoods. Thank you.
Thanks. We have last questions, an extra question. Okay.
Extra profit.
Sofía Mendoza nos ha mandado esta pregunta en español, vamos a decir. ¿Qué tendencias ha observado en la relación entre precios de mercado y valores desde 1995? ¿La globalización o financiarización han afectado esta relación? In English, what trends have you observed in the relationship between market prices and values since 1995? Has globalization or financialization affect this relationship?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and that is something that we should have spent more time on analyzing, because the data set that we have here really has a richness of these time trends. Let me just pick three of them. The first one that's really interesting is with regards to international value transfers. So some countries, on average, have much lower market prices than production prices. Others have much higher market prices than production prices, or actually production direct prices, for that matter. Higher production prices than direct prices. And what we have seen, what has been illustrated really well here, is the changing role of China, which in 1995 was a large giver of value, the world's workbench, as it was called, mostly to the United States and to Central Continental Europe. And between 2005 and 2010 became a large receiver of values from other countries. That's something that I found really interesting. Another thing that we have seen, as you say, is the so financialization can also be seen as a larger share of non-production industries, which is finance and wholesale trade in the sample. And this is concentrated in these traditional imperialist centers. So United States banking, German banking, French banking, they are reaping in more and more profits from productive industries from other countries over this point in time, up to a point where now I think more than 3% of global gross production go into the financial industries in the United States, which I found very interesting. And finally, of course, we could observe the profit rate dynamics between the center and the periphery, and also the rise of some of these countries like Japan, Korea, extended rise of Japan, the rise of Korea, and then in China, where profit rates have been decreasing, but value input from outside has been increasing. So all of these I found very interesting. So both on the industrial and on the between country scale.
Okay, Dr. Patrick Mokre, thank you very much for everything. I have started reading Marx again after your article on price and values. Thank you very much, and best regards wherever you are.
Thank you. Have a great evening then. I'm in Vienna, by the way.
Oh, Vienna. Okay. Thanks for all.
Thank you, Ricardo.